So we're going to get started here. Welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out to this month's Friday Live. We're going to try to have these more often now. Now that our team is expanded and we're not so stressed out on all these different things. Today's topic is really going to be primarily talking about what does it take to get a vertical. And what's really exciting here is that we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe five, maybe 6, actually 7 people here in our group that all have verticals. And that is an exceptionally high percentage of people. And I don't think it's just because of the topic, but it's because partly because of FM BetterForms and our we're really sort of keyed or dialed into that. Before we get started, I'm just going to mention a couple quick things. Please do. Well, this is not a presentation as such. This is really going to be more of a roundtable discussion. We're not trying to lead things from the source of knowledge, because I think my hunch is by the end of it, we'll have some more discovery, but we're not going to have a formula that's going to win things perfectly. So if you want to jump in and ask questions, please, by all means, do. Just unmute. You'll be muted by default, I think, when you first enter the room. But that's fine that we bounce around a little bit. All right, so I want to talk about some of the quick things. Just going to take a few quick minutes, and if I have to pause for a few seconds, sorry, I have a bit of a cold, so you don't want to hear me hack into my mic, so I might pause for a few seconds now and then. So our team has been up to a ton of things. First of all, we've grown our team a little bit, and we've changed some things around a bit. And I'm going to move this off. This is some of our new staff, and we're missing Michael Zalznak. He's a co-op student, grade 11 co-op student. Oh, he's here. All right, right on, man, right on. All right, and he's only been joining us for like about 2 weeks or so, and he's doing a great job. And so I want to give a bit of a shout out to him as well. Some of these folks you'll see on our forum from time to time, answering questions and things like that, or working, if you're doing some consulting with us, working on, they may be a project lead, working on some different projects. Erin has changed roles with us here. Erin was doing project management, and now she's doing operations, which is really, really excited. She's really, really killing that position and keeping everybody on their toes, almost a little too much sometimes, I think. Right, so that's really exciting, and that's going to really help us to continue to move in the right direction, so we can provide a better platform down the road. A couple features that we're working on right now. OAuth is a big one, so I want to show you a quick, really quick demo. We're only going to spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes on each one of these things here. So you're saying, well, what is OAuth? OAuth is basically external authentication. Technically, it's an external authentication protocol. But how does that affect BetterForms? Let's have a look here. And I am going to pull up an app right here. And you'll notice this is an experimental app that I'm playing with in my spare time here. And it's called Better Edit. And basically the idea of the app is it's a code editor. But I didn't want the people to have to register. I didn't want people to have to jump through hoops to log in and do things like that. And so we also needed a test project or a pilot project to use OAuth. So OAuth, you've seen it all the time in various apps. It's basically a single sign-on type system. And with this particular app, it uses GitHub. So this is just a regular BetterForms button here, by the way, and it has an action. And the action is a path action, and it takes you to the OAuth login page. And then OAuth does a redirect back to BetterForms. So let's see it in action here. Currently, this particular one, or the way we've implemented OAuth, is we have the ability to connect to most identity providers. That means things like Facebook, Google, Auth0, and Okta. Auth0 and Okta, those two companies can dynamically themselves connect up to even more providers. So this particular app is actually using Auth0, and I'll show you how easy it is to make some changes to it. So I want to log into the app, so I basically click sign in, and that redirects me to this login page. Now I'm also actually already logged into GitHub earlier because I didn't actually log out. So if I wasn't logged in, it would prompt me for some credentials. So I can say continue with GitHub. And I can click continue, and then you've seen these workflows before. It'll redirect me back to FM BetterForms, and then from there it logs me into the app. Now, what's really cool about this is from FM BetterForms perspective, it knows no difference to this user. You still have a BF user ID, you still have their email in the helper file. It's exactly the same. So it's 100% compatible with any existing apps. And it's something that you can really, really easily add into your app as well. And let's just log out, and let's say we wanted to change this. I don't want to have GitHub. I want to, I'm selling some kind of product. Maybe we want to use Facebook or something like that. So I'm going to go over to the, this is the Auth 0 dashboard. I'm going to click on applications, and I have a couple applications set up in here already. Here's my application. We can create a new application that's like an app. And there's some configuration stuff in here, and hopefully nothing. Yeah, I don't think anything is important to not show or to hide, I should say. So I think we're safe there. We go into connectors or connections, and you can see here's some default ones that are set up already, but Auth 0 has like about 100 different ones, all types of things, from like Steam and all these edge case identity providers, Twitter and so on. But let's say I wanted to add Google. I literally turn that on. I do have to go to my Google admin panel and grab an API key, and I have to enter that into BetterForms. Basically, the way that's done is I would go into, this is our new editor, by the way. If you're not already migrated, this is what it looks like. I go into the app settings here, and I go under authentication, and I just want to make sure there's nothing valuable here. We've obfuscated it for this reason as well. We actually encrypt these credentials, so we don't have access to them either. We do save the last 4 digits prior to the encryption, but that's what's happening there. You basically just turn it on. You turn on third-party authentication. You select the provider that you want to use. This one's using Google. This isn't my app. This is Eduardo's test app. And set some other settings as applicable. We got some documentation for this already as well. Excuse me for a second. And that's it for configuration. On this end, you go into the Google admin panel, you set some configuration there, and then, oops, that's another thing coming up. And then I turn this on, and let's go back to our app again, right here. And let's go to login again this time. And you can see, boom, I got Google turned on. So it's like literally that easy to change these types of providers. Inside the helper file, there's there's one extra field. So the helper file is not 100% compatible. It's a new update for that. But that's a pretty easy migration. So that's it for OAuth for now. Eventually we'll have a separate Friday Live to talk about that feature. It's in beta now. We've moved it out of alpha. There's going to be a lot of changes, but they're most likely we don't expect any breaking changes. It'll be more feature adds and things like that as we test it out. It's only available with premium plans. It won't be available with the citizen developer plan. And if you want, if you're interested in getting to use that, we'll provide free support to help get that implemented. All right, because we do want to see people start to use that and test it out. Anybody have any questions about that? Jump right in. All right, next one is BetterForms Enterprise, and this is something that people have been asking for a while, and I think it's really just one of those things that everybody wants, that feature, like a cup holder or something like that, or something, but may or may not use. But we do have some people who do absolutely need it. Basically, what BF Enterprise is it's a fully standalone version of BetterForms. And 100% standalone, 100% offline. And I'm just going to jump to a picture here. Right here. All right. And here's how basically it works. Currently, BetterForms, we have a number of data centers, and we have our application ourselves, the BetterForms editor, and that runs in our cloud. It's a BetterForms app, as you know, and it runs in the cloud as well. With BetterForms Enterprise, you still do your editing with the editor in the cloud. Right. So that software is proprietary, and we keep that in the cloud. But once you've done your editing, I'll give you kind of a quick rundown here. This is not exactly, we're still working on the UI, but we will do a little bit of a show here that show that it is working. You'll see an extra stage here. You got development, staging, production, and there'll be enterprise. And you basically deploy to enterprise. And what will happen is on your on-premise server, you'll run a small Docker image, right? That can be about a half a CPU, typically, or so is plenty to serve. So it's a small Linux box. And we have information to how to configure it. But companies like DigitalOcean, you can one button click and deploy a Docker setup. And then it's basically pasting a command line in and one configuration file that has some secret keys. And that's pretty much all it needs to install. And then that will run on that one Docker image. It's super cheap for you and your data center. And anybody who has enterprise probably already has their own DevOps people anyway. And then what happens is the helper file, there's a new helper file, second helper file, and that's actually going to serve your BetterForms application to the BetterForms base code. So that helper file will sit on your FileMaker server down here, plus the original helper file that's separate from your app. And it will connect to the cloud when you're online, download your current versions of your web apps into the helper file, and then it serves them out standalone. Right, we are going to put user interface so you can roll forward and roll backwards versions of that file. And because really it's almost a DNS change, whether you point to our server or to your server, you can even use it as a backup if you wanted to. Right, so if you're worried about the hit by a bus factor, that's going to be a lot of buses now. But if you worry about all of us getting hit by a bus, that kind of a thing, or something, the stability of our company, then you'll have that as a peace of mind as well. All right, so that's the way BetterForms Enterprise works. And let's do a quick show. Eduardo, are you able to give us a real quick demo?
Yes.
Or kind of a half demo? And we'll just see it real fast.
Yeah, so this would how the helper file would look like, the enterprise one. So you would log in with your regular BetterForms account, because you would be using your credentials, and your helper file would be all the same.
And the idea here is that this way the helper file knows what account belongs to from a security aspect.
Mm-hmm. And then from here, you would be able to get, this is live. So we're actually seeing all the apps we have under this current organization I'm logged in. And here you would be able to download all the forms and the sites regarding this application. So yeah, this would be basically what we would have here. And then for the Docker itself, you would just literally one line of code and one environment file. You would start the Docker. So now it's up and running. We can see here, I'm running on Docker desktop right now. So here's my pod running. And then if I go to localhost, that's where it's running. I have my.
And this is only because you don't have a domain pointing
Yeah,
to it.
no, yeah, I'm just running locally. So, and it's a regular BetterForms app.
Right. This is just a test app. So basically, just as a quick recap, the helper file, you log into the helper file, download your current apps, serve them from a Docker image. When we update our base code, it's very easy to update that Docker image as well. It's 100% scalable. You can scale it. We don't currently have any limitations on scaling or anything like that. So this is the identical software that we're running in our data centers, right? The only difference is we use slightly different keys, of course, for our stuff versus your local stuff. And we have a lot more infrastructure that wraps around it. But as a minimal functional server, it just really needs that one Docker. We run a couple other layers of software on top, Kubernetes and Rancher on top of those there. But that is how that works. And it's going to be available over the next, probably we're doing, the UX is getting designed right now. There's no UX here. This is just sort of placeholder stuff. So the next 2 sprints, I would say that we'll have this ready for beta testing, which will be in approximately 3 weeks. So if you're interested in that, just message and set up a time and we can talk through that. We don't have pricing on it yet, but it'll be pretty reasonable, I think. So,
Charles, who's the target client for that, or the target?
Yeah. The target client is people who have data centers and they don't want, they have a strict policy with stuff being on outside their data center. Some universities, some car manufacturing companies where they have a proprietary confidential information about the engineering of their vehicles. We have another in-house company that they basically run everything in-house, and that's just simply the policy. They have about 400 users in their in FileMaker, and they want to extend some functionality out as well.
Yeah.
We didn't. This didn't take a ton of engineering. It was reasonably easy project in terms of us to get out the door. And the main reason for that is when we designed the base code in BetterForms, we had this in mind going forward. So that was a bonus for us. So. Okay, so thank you, Eduardo.
No problem.
I'm going to jump back to my screen here. A couple other things I want to show before we get cracking that I'm really excited about. Version 2 editor, where we do every 2 weeks, bi-weekly updates. And we had one this morning, for example, a smaller update that was on some code that you won't see too much visually. But we're on a regular 2-week sprint for that now. And so you're going to start to see a lot more steady progress there. The editor, we have probably about 15-20% of our developers are using our new editor. There are still some UI things to work out. There's a lot of different tooling that's gone into the editor. The main difference is the ability to support the environments. So in this case here, I have this this editor that I was just showing you, and I have a development environment, a production environment, and you've probably seen this before. Oops, that's not what I want. I want to deploy, and I want to push this version out. So right now this is at version 5, and it looks like somebody's edited something in the production one here as well, but this is at version 5. And we can actually see what's changed. There's only 2 pages have been edited there. 1 page has been edited over there. That was just a quick patch, live patch. So if I want to produce this or send this to production, we say next and next. And this is actually taking advantage of a new feature in our editor. Excuse me. And basically the idea is that it's a live messaging from the server. So that was actual live information that came from the server pushing back, and you have advantage. You can take advantage of that with our new messaging option, and that is available in production, or sorry, in our staging code now, right now. And that's it. And now you can see that these are both at version 6. This hasn't been edited. This one hasn't been edited. If I make a quick edit here, let's go into this page. And I'll make just a quick save, and we'll go back to our environments, and you can see now that that page has been edited. So there's a bit of a logging in there as well. We'll continue to work on this feature. It's quite a large feature, but for the most part, we're pretty happy with the progress of the editor now. So that's with that. A couple other two things here as well in the roadmap. Is this is really exciting. So enterprise, we've already talked about. Enterprise, you can always see our public roadmap from the link in the app. Enterprises in production are some code editor bug fixes have been finally knocked off. Messaging is done. We're slowly moving things across here. And another big one that's coming up is application. This is a Q4 goal that we just set. And so maybe mid-November to December. And this is base code performance things. So we're looking at making some significant changes. So we have faster app load times and near offline performance. And then probably the quarter after that, we'll make offline abilities. So that's going to be coming up as well. The biggest difference is what will happen is we're going to download a lot more information asynchronously. When the app first loads, we'll download your initial page and the base code for the app, of course. And then in the background, it'll grab all your other pages that it needs from your slugs. And as you navigate around, we'll have a different sort of way, a different feel, because there's zero lag time, because all the data is going to be local. So it'd be super, super performant. BetterForms has lots of areas that we can add performance. And that's one of the ones that now is coming to the front of the task list. Okay, and finally, this is really promising. I just wanted to mention this quick. This is for people who are using Tailwind, which is the majority of the way we recommend designing things now. And I think I have an example really quick here. Let me just go into here and let me just find this app here, demo. Sorry. Okay, so basically Tailwind is a CSS framework, and it's a very, very flexible framework, and they're very semantically named classes. So it's really easy for users to design things. And it's not really limited, but what it is we use the CDN. So typically in a typical app, like the BetterForms base code, for example, a typical app, when you put CSS into it, you have a pruning function when you build the app. BetterForms is an app that the apps are built dynamically and live. So there is no pruning to be done because there's basically nothing there but your app. We do some code splitting and things like that underneath the hood for performance. But we use Tailwind as a CDN because it wasn't built as part of BetterForms. And because of that, there's a ton of variance in the types of classes and things that you would use. For example, here's some HTML here. All right. So for example, if I wanted to, let me get rid of this here, because this was an experiment that somebody was indicating that they had some problems with. So I may have to not be able to use that one. Let me just see here. Okay. There. Okay. So if I wanted to add a class in here, so a class, and I want a color or a font text size, before I would say text extra large, something like that. And my computer is a little bit slow here. And that's how I would normally access this class. With this new version of Tailwind, what it does is it's called just-in-time compiling. So it's a CDN, but instead of having every known class and every variant, which is about 300K of data that would have to download, it dynamically generates all those classes. So it's JavaScript instead of CSS. So basically speaking, it's smart enough to interpret what you type. And it also means that you can do stuff like this, where I can say 102 pixels. And let me just, I think I just want to make sure I have it in this app. There we go. And now it's exactly 102 pixels. So for the people who are doing pixel perfect design, this is a real big game changer for BetterForms. If you're interested in learning more about that, well, maybe we're just experimenting with it. I've only tried it in a couple apps now. So far, I haven't run into any issues with it, but it's basically just changing the CDN tag. Everything's 100% compatible, but now you have the ability to do stuff like this, and you can use any variant that's in Tailwind. So all of the combinations of hover and all of those things like that, and without bloating the file. So it's actually more performant. So smaller download and more flexibility. So that's coming up, or sorry, that's not coming up, but that's just new that anybody can start to use as well. It's a just-in-time CDN. If you Google that, you can find it. All right. So I think that is it for that. Let's jump on to our main topic, which is basically to talk about verticals. And I really want this to be more of a roundtable of discussion. So we have two primary guests here, but I think I'm gonna, if you don't mind, and we have a lot of other people here as well, that we can sort of ping off and throw some questions at. And I'm going to introduce both of them. Unfortunately, I didn't make a slide for this. I just realized that now. So first person we have is Mark Anderson of Floristware. And Mark, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit in just a second, but and just tell us a little bit about how you sort of what your product is as an excerpt. And the second person is Jesse Roberts of N2O Solutions. Is it, Jesse?
Yeah, that's it.
Right. Okay. All right. So maybe we can start just as a background, and I also see a bunch of other people in the audience as well. So we'll jump you guys in there too. Mark, you have Floristware, and it's a FileMaker based software solution. How long have you had that for?
I started developing it probably 18 years ago and have been selling it for the last 16.
Right. And then how did you end up in the vertical space there? Like, what was the story there behind that?
So my dad had a flower shops, and I was working for him. And this was back when most flower shops didn't have software. They just used carbon pads. And he took me to a demo of a solution. Somebody was trying to sell their product, got a bunch of florists together. And later he asked me what I thought about it. And I said, I guess it's okay. What do they charge for something like that? And I think he said something like, oh, 45. And okay, I said, for 4,500, I guess it's okay, but it doesn't seem like a great deal. And then he said, no, it's 45,000. And so it seemed like there was an opportunity there, and it just it just kind of grew from there.
Right. And were you guys using FileMaker already to start off with, or how did you end up with FileMaker as a code base?
Oh, I had been using FileMaker forever. I had started using Clarisworks for different businesses that I was involved with. And at one point I had to mock up sort of an e-commerce website, and I built it in FileMaker. And that was what I knew, so that was what I stuck with.
Right. And as you built the product, was it sort of an incremental thing? Did you start to add features in later on, or was it like what was your first customer sale, so to speak? How did that evolve, or what did the product look like then versus now?
It was rough. I was one of those guys that that's a nightmare to so many people on this call, where I had no formal training. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just one of those people who made something in FileMaker. And then kind of that was like my undergraduate degree in FileMaker was that first one, and and kept hacking that into workman like state for as long as I could. And then about 10 years ago, just tore it all down and started from scratch with a much better kind of foundation. And that's the one we're still on now, and hopefully will be for a long time.
Right. So you basically had an initial MVP, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
And then you rewrote it from scratch.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, we'll get into some of the problems a little bit later on, because I think I have a slide to cover some of that stuff of what that's like. Mark and I met. Mark was actually really, really instrumental. Without Mark, I sort of wouldn't be here myself. Just like Mark, I developed some FileMaker stuff, but for my own business, another business. And I was at a meetup group in Toronto here, and I figured I'll go check it out, see what these guys know. And these guys are all whiz kids, right? What do I know about anything? And Mark came up to me afterwards and goes, "Oh, you seem fairly knowledgeable. What's your bandwidth like? Do you have any time?" Right? And I wanted to cover up, so it was a bit of an imposter syndrome. So I said, "Well, I could check my bandwidth, and well, if I knew what that meant." And anyhow, I started doing some development on his product, and we're still have that friend/working relationship today. So thank you for that,
Charles. If I could, that was funny. That was my first SOFA meeting too. And I was at a low point. I desperately needed help. And I went there on a mission. And I think, if anybody's ever looking for help, which is hard to find, it's a great way to do it. I went to this meeting and I got to see people and the way they asked questions and the way they kind of dealt with people. And I'm going to say that there were two people that I was really excited about in that whole group. And we have a great group here. But I'll say there was two, so nobody will be offended. And you were the preferred one. And at the bar afterwards, I talked to you, and I've been happy to be working with you ever since.
Cool. So I didn't get voted off the island. So we also have Jesse Roberts, and Jesse Roberts of N2O Solutions. Jesse, you have a few verticals now, and maybe you could tell us how you got started with your first one.
Sure. So my first vertical really started as a labor of love for my wife's company. She started a promotional marketing agency in the wine and spirits industry after having worked for the parent company of Jägermeister and Grey Goose for a bunch of years. And she started her own agency and started to drown quickly in kind of these manual processes that involved Excel, keying things into Google, and then using OneNote to track everything that happened and doing multiple keying of everything. And so she quickly started to drown, and I realized we had to do something to kind of get her sorted out and get her life back, because she was doing 3 or 4 all-nighters a month just trying to keep up with payroll and documentation and all that sort of thing. So it really started there, and it started with a buddy of mine who I reached out to say, hey, do you know any good data systems that I could kind of help to try and get something built? And he recommended Filemaker, and cobbled together kind of this first little thing that was basically like 3 tables and tied a couple of things together. And that was 12 years ago now, I guess. And that file has now grown. We now license it to companies like hers all over the country. And we've figured out a way to monetize a couple different areas of that vertical now, and really expand. So it's not just about, the management of her company. It's also digging into the pockets of the people who have all the money, so to speak, which are the big liquor companies. So it's been fun.
How did you find that first client? How did that turn out?
So because she worked for the parent company with Jaeger and Sidney Frank, there were other people like hers, like Shannon, throughout the U.S. who started their own agency, and they were friends of hers. So she was able to just kind of get them on the phone and say, here's what I'm doing. Let me show you what we've built to run what we're doing, and it'll make your lives a hell of a lot easier, and it'll get your life back. And so we did basically 2 demos. We sold 2 instances right off the first phone call, and we were off and running. It was pretty crazy.
Was there any competition? Like sorry, if you could just, Jesse's been on before, and he's talked quite a bit about this product. So you can find that video. I think we still have it on YouTube, or we may. But maybe Jesse, if you could just tell us what it was, what the app is.
Yeah, sure. So the app it's called Stiletto, and it started basically as just a way to make sure that the best way to describe it is it's a staffing application, is how it started, just to put people, the brand ambassadors, like when you're out of the bar and you see the Jack Daniels girls, those are the people that work for my wife. So it started out as an application to staff those people in various bars and restaurants and liquor stores all over the Mid-Atlantic. So it started with that. But then as it grew, we realized that we needed to do more things, and we needed to do payroll, and we needed to do some inventory and some reporting, and we need to do some API connections to other things. So it really grew from that standpoint. We were using FileMaker Go for a while to try and have some of those brand ambassadors in the field enter their data to take some of the heavy lifting off. And like many verticals that are trying to use a mobile application, we ran into a number of kind of limitations on the FileMaker side. That's where BetterForms really kind of came in for us, was the ability to kind of free ourselves from the App Store and free ourselves from Google Play, and put the data and the business intelligence and business knowledge into the browser, and make things a lot easier for people to manage. So that's really kind of where it started, and we've had our development has really ramped up over the past 2 years even, because now we don't have to spend so much time on kind of maintenance. We can do much more of our time and effort on development and feature creation and rollout, which has been fantastic.
Sorry, forgive me if I asked this already, but did you have, was the competition significant? Like, what other things were in that place?
So it's interesting. There weren't any real competitors in the space to start with. There have been a couple that have kind of jumped in, but where we were able to kind of keep the competitive edge is that the people that were in the space were basically software people who had no liquor experience. And I think the big difference for many of us who have verticals is we're able to put some business intelligence and knowledge transfer into our applications, and that's what makes them so powerful. If you just told software person liquor app, they would make one, but they would really not understand the nuances of the industry. And I think that is really one of the most powerful things about our platform with FileMaker and connecting with BetterForms, is that most of us in the vertical space have some sort of subject matter expertise that they're able to take and convert into software.
Right. So that would be same. I guess that's really the same story with Mark. Is you already had the background knowledge. So having that front person, which happens to be yourself,
right,
know the industry is somewhat key.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And that's the story of my second vertical as well.
Mark, did you with Floristware, was there much competition initially versus now, or how has that changed?
There was early on. It was relatively easy because it was a few big companies that just charged outrageous amounts of money, and it was back in the days where people it was still an outright purchase plus fees. And I was the first one in the flower business who offered a SaaS model. In fact, I thought I invented the SaaS model. It turned out they already had it, but I did think I invented it. And then since then, it's only gotten worse. I mean, it's one of the big mistakes I made was going in way too cheap. And since I started, there's probably been 10 competitors jump in that all emulated our pricing and our model. And probably 5 or 6 of them are still around. And unfortunately, it really became kind of a race to the bottom.
That's interesting expression. You had mentioned that to me once. I was looking for a vertical, and I've been talking to you about getting involved in some kind of a software-based business for years, way before BetterForms. And I actually came to you a number of times with ideas. And I wouldn't say you shot them down, but you were pretty blunt in asking questions, right? And you asked some really, really valid questions, like, how basically real simple things, like common sense things, because it's so easy to get romantically involved with your idea that, like all romance, it blinds you to all other sense of logic. So one of the things that you asked me or some of the things were, what is the market space like? How many, if you're going to build a product for this niche area, do you have anybody? I think you mentioned that. Do you have anybody who knows that area well, not just something that you heard? And is there enough money on the table, right, that you can take a tiny fraction of that little money that's already there, maybe, and will it succeed?
Charles, the funny thing about that is I hope I didn't seem negative. It was only because
Oh no, not at all. No, you're never, no, not at all. No, it was really good, because what it did is it made me go back to the drawing board, right? I look at those things, and it's very important to be objective about ideas. And then you go back and you come back with another idea, and you think, okay, this is what I'm playing around with. And we had looked at other ideas before. People don't know this, but before FM BetterForms, I had started working on. I didn't really have a name for it, but if it had a name, it would be called FM Better Widgets. And basically, the idea was it was a JavaScript snippets configurator that would make it really easy for people to pop stuff into web viewers. But that brings us up to another thing, like strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats, and what the longevity of a product is. What do you guys feel like? What makes a good product idea then? It seems like it's you have to have some kind of inside knowledge. That's one thing. What else would?
I think from my perspective, I think about it in terms of, does the software, does it solve a pain point for your prospective clients? And there are times where you have a great idea for software that doesn't necessarily solve a pain point. And people pay into pain points. The second vertical I have for private schools solves a major pain point in terms of research and revenue generation. It's great, but part of the education is you have to make the client understand, hey, by the way, this is a pain point. You get this as a pain point, right? So I think there's an education piece that's really important.
So you think, sorry to interrupt you, you think some people don't realize that there's clients there that don't realize how much pain they're in because they're just doing something a certain way? And
That's exactly it. We've always
Right.
done it this way. We haven't thought that there's another solution. And then when you open their eyes to the other solution, then that's when you have the aha moment. And then you have the ability to capture that pain point and turn that into
I think it's funny. I think as developers, and especially I think the consulting developers that are on the group, quite often you get a client and they say, "Can you build this?" And they're actually replicating their pain points. They're just basically taking some paper-shaped thing and turning it into a UI and want the exact functionality because they feel it's comfortable, but it's not really a step forward. Yeah.
Charles, can I ask a question or just make a
Yeah,
comment?
please do. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry I joined late. In my experience, one of the biggest problems for people launching a software product is there's a lot of them create the thing because they're in love with the idea of the technology of being able to like do X, Y, Z with technology. And so basically it's a solution in search of a problem. So this speaks to Jesse's point there. But one of the wrinkles that I wanted to put on that was, Jesse, to your point about you have to educate the client. In a lot of cases, like if there is really a need, then there's no education involved. You show them something and they're like, oh my God, I'll definitely spend money because you just saved me 5 days worth of work every week or every month. So it's that idea of being careful of not falling down the trap of, if I build it, they'll come. First of all, because I think I have the best idea for how to solve this problem. And there's a lot of people out there who build solutions. They're like, Mark, kind of like what you were saying before to Charles, like, so what? Okay, you got this idea for this product. Okay, like, yeah, it's cool that you can do it, but are you solving that pain point for somebody? And is it obvious to them such that when they see it, they're going to be going, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever, rather than just being if I build it, they'll come because I'm so smart kind of an idea.
That's a really good point. Fred is a UX designer. He's been on some calls before. His company is UX Edge, and he's given us a lot of help over the years with us and with his clients. Fred, if they wanted to get a hold of you, quick shout out and plug, I guess, the contact page here.
Yeah, sure. Fred at uxedge.ca.
Super.
Yeah. Cool. Anyway, sorry, I didn't want to hijack.
No.
I wanted to make a point about
this
that.
Is good. This is the whole idea.
Because that's where some people really fall down and do a ton of work on building something that there's really not that much of a need for.
Right. Okay. I think this might take away from that. What about execution? Maybe we can start with, we'll jump back to Mark. How did you go about building your app? Like I think you sort of covered this a little bit. In your case, I guess it was a little bit more gradual, different from Jesse's. When you did your version 2 of your app, what was the hardest part and what were the challenges? What processes did you go through to decide, hey, I'm going to redo this thing?
It's funny because when I started it, does anybody follow the is it Joel on software, something like that? That he went on to do the Business of Software conference. But he always said, that there's this siren song of rebuilding, starting from scratch. And he said, you should never do that. You should always keep building on what you have and improving it. And I read that and I thought, yeah, but I'm different and it'll be easier to start with the blank. And we all know the appeal of that, right? That there's no legacy stuff to deal with. There's no muddling through. But that was totally wrong, because what I didn't understand was it took me a couple of years to build the first version. I thought it would take a couple of years to do the ground up rewrite. What I forgot to take into account that when I was doing the first version, there was no one to support, there was no staff to manage. There was none of that. It was just, 10, 12 plus hours of development a day. And then suddenly with the rewrite, it was, a lot of times I'd be lucky if I could squeeze in a few hours a day. And that was a huge mistake.
How could you have mitigated that? Is there anything you could have done?
I think probably incremental changes, building on what I had, would have been a better idea. you know, a little bit like what Fred said. I don't think I'm alone in this as a technician, but the idea you could build something so perfect that it would just drop like this bomb and everybody would love it, you know, instead of kind of tweaking and just making it work a little bit better each time. So yeah, I probably should have just kept building on the original. And
that's an interesting thing, because you can really get into a lot of times people think, okay, total rewrite. And I think that's that's almost a separate talk in terms of approach. Regarding the administrative side, we found the same thing with FM BetterForms. We had 3 clients technically that we were using our product, including ourselves, maybe 4, and nobody else on the network. So we didn't really have any. There's no monetization systems built in or anything like that. And I could push out one of our original users, Dan. He would say, hey, we got a problem with this. And I could push out a version to our base code, which is pretty deep down. And 2 or 3, sometimes versions a day we could deploy. And now it's a fight to get even the front end, which is the easiest part of the system to change. It's a front end. It's a struggle to get that onto a 2-week schedule. We have to have a lot more infrastructure, and we're just starting to get that now with project manager and operations people and dedicated front end and back end teams and things like that. We're just getting to the point that we can start to put a task in and it goes through the pipeline. So it's a really that kind of I don't know what you want to call it, but that kind of sludge that evolves into a system seems to happen as soon as you start to get some customers and you don't have the pipeline, the infrastructure set up to do that. And you never bother to make those pipelines when you're a sole developer, a solopreneur. Do you have any deployment systems now, Mark? Do you have any methodology that you follow?
No comment. Yeah,
I wasn't trying to rook you into that.
that is a problem. You know, I'm always so focused on the next version and the next feature that it's a real problem. You know, we have people on versions that are year old. Because I just, yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem.
Right.
I need more discipline on that. If anybody has any ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Jesse, for yourself, how did you find that, was there a point that you hit where you start to get a few customers and the rate of change in your app slows down?
Well, I mean, I think to Mark's point, like the rate of change was one thing. As soon as you start to scale up customers with single instance files and each customer having a different business process and having different things, it becomes really unmanageable at a certain point. And as a solo, having a solo shop, it grew some tentacles that really quickly that just made things almost impossible to manage. So, I had to be really deliberate about how I tried to keep track of changes I made to the master application and then how I rolled them into other versions. And this is way before the ability to, to roll out new versions using, FileMaker stuff. Like I'd have to go in and literally, layout by layout and by hand do all this other work. And it just got to be ugly. Of course, there's 2 pieces to that. One is I'm self-taught and basically have been doing everything I can to learn any opportunity I can, whether it's DevCon or videos or trying to pick up nuggets from people everywhere. So I was trying to learn best practices and build the plane while I was flying it in many cases. I think we've gotten better about that over time. And we've gotten our clients on a schedule now where they know that, okay, things are updated at a certain time. We're better about giving them feedback into what's coming down the pipe in terms of what features are ready for them. So it's much less of a kind of haphazard thing. And we've tried to be more systematic because at the end of the day, I want to make sure we keep our customers happy. But it wasn't easy to start with, that's for sure. And I think the other thing that I would definitely say about that is I have been because I was self-taught, it was always just, I figured it was just me and the files. I'm the only one. I knew what I was doing, and I wasn't as good at documenting what I was doing along the way. And now I've tried to be better about that, because occasionally we have, people from Delphson looking at file or whatever. So we've been better about making sure that we're trying to document and make our code more readable for my own purposes, but let alone as we scale. I know there are times where we might need other sets of eyes on things, and I want to make sure that what we do is what's what I'm looking for is doesn't need to be deciphered, if that makes any sense. Like it's clean and easy to read, because that just makes it easy for people to help you out if you have run into problems.
Right. So that's technical debt, and that's super, super key with any app. Our base code, fortunately, I wrote BetterForms for the most part, architected it from the bottom up as a fresh application with the intention of not having any tech debt. So we're pretty lucky. We have very little tech debt, but there still is, because we've evolved and we've changed the way we do certain things. So we have a few scripts that are kind of old code and new code and things like that, but it's exceptionally hygienic in general. And our whole team now, I think, realizes, and they're all on board with that same process. Mark, did you run into any tech debt when as you deployed your second version, or sorry, not your second version, but your rebuild from there going forward?
Yeah, for sure.
To control that, or?
Yeah, and that to me was kind of the fallacy of thinking that a blank page was going to solve all the problems, because, almost as soon as this new version was released, the foundation was so much better. There were still significant things that I'd love to fix, but I know, those fixes are a year or two away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, because I get a chance to see, we have about 15% of our users have verticals. And it's probably a little higher percentage in the call here today. And I see some apps with a ton of tech debt, and I'm not 100% convinced that it's a problem. I know it's a problem, but what I mean by that is their app works. Functionally, it works, and it solves the problem. It hits a pain point, and it's making money. So when does the tech debt come in? Like, when does it really come in? And I think is if you want to have some longevity, or if you want the app to significantly grow. We had to make some code-based changes. We had to rewrite some of our actions processor in BetterForms because the way it is. And then we just discussed this last week. We have to rewrite it again because we have to make it multi-threaded, where it's not single-threaded right now. So it can run like multiple actions. And it's a small thing, but it's not really a tech debt thing, but it was something that you have to sort of make decisions. Do I go quicker, or do I go longer and considerably slower when you're first coding? And I think that's a real hard one. I get stuck with that quite often, but I think at the end of the day, the people who get it done and just iterate on that are still better off, even though they have crummier or uglier code or more cruft in it. As much as as an engineer in me, I hate to admit that. So what about ownership? And is it better to have partners, solo? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Maybe Jesse, will start with yourself. What's your ownership model there?
So we're basically 100% ownership. We have structured both of our organizational corporate structures for both of the vertical apps to align for acquisition. That's kind of always been the end goal for both of these. I think I wanted to make it really clean and easy for potential acquisition partners, if there weren't a lot of entangling issues to go on with those conversations.
That's interesting. What did you do for that, aside from, I guess, set up the business as a corporation and so on? But are there any other logistical or administrative things that you had to do to?
Yeah. So, obviously with my wife, we own multiple companies together, and what we wanted to make sure that the software side of what I do was completely separate, so that people would never have the ability to buy her company, which has its own sources of recurring revenue and its own sources of contracts and everything else, so that the application that is directly connected to her industry is separate. And like I said, we've kind of got two different verticals inside of the liquor business piece, and I've got the other vertical that's in the private school piece. And there are two verticals there on the liquor side, and we wanted to make sure that if there was a purchase, that it was very clear and delineated what would be part of those exit strategies for either software platform. So we really started from the ground up, and the money we spent with our legal team was well worth it, because we know that everything's protected and set up in such a way that there won't be issues when acquisition conversations happen. So that was really kind of the first piece. And I was fortunate. I used to work for an ed tech company that was really kind of the big gorilla in the space. So I knew enough about kind of those acquisitions to make sure that I had kind of the right questions answered, and that anytime the software contracts went out, that our contracts were written in such a way that provided for severability should an acquisition take place.
Interesting. Mark, how about yourself? What are your thoughts on first of all, you're a sole owner, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And everything Jesse said made a ton of sense. I thought I'm sure a lot of people with verticals here have had the situation where, you try and hire a salesperson or a developer or something, and right away they want ownership. And I've always avoided that, not out of greed, but really just for the burden of reporting. And if I wanted a job, if I wanted to answer to somebody else, I would do that. But I really don't want to. I just don't want to have to. And anybody who's done this bootstrapping knows how much debt you accumulate early on. And when people, it's kind of funny when they kind of come in and want 20% from day one, and kind of at that point, 20% really means that they now own 20% of the house that you refinance, kind of thing. So I've never had partners or investors or anything like that. The one time I think it makes sense is, we talked early on, anybody here who has a vertical, I'm sure you've had people come to you and tell you their idea. And I always thought that seeking investors would be a great way to kind of vet ideas, because we're all blind. Charles, you mentioned this, right? We all think all our ideas are great, and we're wrong. I mean, I'm sure even Facebook every day thinks, man, we don't have the market penetration we want. We still don't have everybody on the planet using this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, just before somebody else put money in, I think they'd give you really honest answers about how viable your idea was.
I see Neil. Neil, can I ask you? Neil Manchester is in the UK. Can I ask you a few questions? Would you mind?
Go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So Neil has a vertical. Maybe you could tell us about a vertical, because your software as a service, and a little bit about the history as well.
Yeah, of course. So quite similar to Jesse, actually. I'm married to a nurse who does aesthetics, so Botox, fillers, all that sort of stuff. She, up until very recently, also ran a training company, so sort of did her own clinics and then trained other people as well. So probably, 10 years ago, she was running training courses from Excel spreadsheets, and I thought there's got to be a better way of doing that. So stumbled across FileMaker as someone who had recently bought a Mac, and just sort of cobbled something together looking at one of the starter solutions, and then came across FM Starting Point, and that was really what I used to kind of self-teach myself. Sort of took that to bits and looked at how the table structures worked, and table of currencies and scripting and all that sort of stuff. So kind of taught myself from there. And in playing with that, at the time, she was doing all of her client consent forms just on paper, and she'd regularly ring from a clinic and say, they told me that Emma Jones was in, and it's Emma James, and I've bought the wrong consent forms. Can you tell me what I did last time? And I'd sort of hunt through these piles of consent forms that hadn't yet been filed away and all that sort of stuff. So I sort of thought, there must be a better way of being able to do that. I think at the time, FileMaker Go had just had some fairly good updates to it. So I kind of used what I'd learned from Starting Point and developed something for her to be able to keep a track of all of her patients, do her consent forms on the iPad, you know, take her before and after pictures, mark up photos of where she'd injected and all that sort of stuff. So it really just started probably about 7 or 8 years ago as a sort of an evening project for me, and to allow her to sort of do her job better and, like you say, solve that pain point. And then because she was then training other people, I then started to get people asking me about it as oh, you know, is there any way we can get a copy of this? Because we've seen your wife using it on the training course, and it you know, it looks like it would solve a problem that we've got. And it's just kind of really grown into a business from there, really. So again, similar to Mark and Jesse, had some issues where I had clients with different copies because someone had asked for this feature and someone had asked for another feature, and so yeah, I've also definitely been through that period of pain. And then I actually used the first lockdown to kind of almost as a line in the sand and say, right, everyone's going to, wherever possible, be on exactly the same version. And then when new features are requested, I'll do everything I can to make it a feature that will be beneficial to everyone. That then allows it as a vertical market then, I think, rather than many individual copies of the same thing. And that's actually worked fairly well over the last couple of years, sort of 18 months, 2 years. So I'm now at the point where I use the Geist Interactive's data migration setup. Yeah, oh, that's it. Yeah. Use Otto to sort of manage my sort of various servers, and then I have a live development file that I sort of manage to keep track of, you know, what features are being added when, and then I push out an update probably 3 or 4 times a year with all the new features and any bug fixes that people identify and stuff like that. And then I've managed to use BetterForms to add some additional functionality like online booking for clients and the ability for clients to fill in their consent forms in advance of their appointment, which again is then saving the clinicians that are using it time and money on the day of the appointment.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. So, and Neil, have you structured your app is really solving a problem? So, but are you structuring it to have an exit plan as well, or that's not really on the site?
It's more about that yet.
So let's pay for the mortgage first, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. At some point, I should probably think about that, but I've not really put any thought into that at the minute.
What about teams and how you work? So I started off myself with just me working on our base code, and a very large chunk of our BetterForms editor at the time I wrote at a beach or at the beach, what do you call it? The beach bar in Jamaica on vacation. And every time I see some of those bits of code, I can still see that there. And then later on, we added some developers. We added Jason was one of our first ones. He's on the call here today, Jason Perry, and Lindsay Clark, but she's not here today. Were some of the original people we added, and we started to grow a little bit. What for yourself, Mark? Are you sort of a sole developer? I don't know. We have a proper name for that. I got a Maverick, or you have a small team, or consulting, or how does that work?
So I do probably 70% of it, and then there are other people involved in the rest. I definitely think it's a handicap to growth. I would love to be able to get somebody who could kind of own it, so I could focus on things other than development. And I've sort of tried to do it over the years and always failed. And it's actually my biggest fear is getting somebody in, getting them up to speed, which I think would take about a year. It's a big solution to really kind of have it in their head. And then I just worry that they would leave and I would have to start all over again and get myself back into it. And that really holds me back. And I just don't know how to get past that.
That's an interesting thing. one of our key team who works on our base code, Eduardo, I think I saw him on the call here. Yeah. He was just saying the other day, he's been with us, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, Eduardo, about 2 years, maybe year and a half, something like that.
Yeah.
Something approximately anyway. And he was just saying, oh, this is the first time I've used this code, like something, because we have 4 code bases. We have our base code and our application code and our 2 parts of our base code and our 2 app codes, and then plus the apps we build in the editor. So we have this literally 4 code bases. And it's hard for somebody to get to know all of that stuff. But one thing I can say is once somebody becomes proficient in one area, if you only have them working on one small area, they can get proficient fairly quick. We have 2 new front-end developers. Primarily, they're working on front-end, but they're going to be working more full stack later. Christina and Mohammed. And they literally in their second week, I would say, were functional enough that they could work on client projects. Now they do have a computer science background, and that did give them a big advantage, I think. But that made onboarding super easy. So what we find it's much easier now to onboard somebody and to get them productive when your team is bigger than when it's smaller, if that makes sense. How about yourself, Jesse?
So I guess I'm still technically the Maverick developer here. I've had a couple of occasions where I've had people that I've brought in for a month or 2 to do some work, to do some heavy lifting. And I think for me, it's been good to know kind of what the limits of my skill set are. When it comes to implementing like a JavaScript dashboard or something like that, I can only go so far. So that's when I know I need to kind of hire consultant time or bring other people in who have the requisite knowledge. We've recently implemented what's called the Entrepreneur's Operating System. And in our
we have as well. Okay, yes.
So we do EOS. And side note, Charles, my wife Shannon is a certified implementer. So, for the background.
Awesome.
So we put that in place, and that's actually really helped me to step back from things, to know when what I'm doing is more visionary and focused on the future of the product and products and where we want to go, and what should be more day-to-day and integrator focused, kind of lining up all the ducks and doing all those things. So that's been actually really helpful from a team perspective to change my perspective on the work from having to be hands-on in the weeds every day to spending time thinking about the future and the focus and making sure that we've got resources to bring in small team and consultant time.
So you brought that in recently. How big is your team at that? What point did you bring that in?
EOS?
Yeah.
So I've been doing EOS now on my company now for about 6 months. Shannon's been using it for about 2 years, and she used COVID to go and get certified to be an implementer. So now she does that for other companies, including my own.
So just for background for people who wonder what EOS, it stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's basically a set of rules that you use to govern your business. For example, meetings are conducted in a very specific fashion. We used to have our Monday stand-up. Our team has a one weekly meeting. Every Monday, we have a stand-up for about 15 minutes. And it's just to talk about the things that are going on in the organization. But it used to be a little bit more free form where I led it. And that becomes chaotic because I'm not organized for it. It's not my, and I just end up talking about things that are of interest only to me. And that's no good. So what we do now is with EOS is we have a couple minutes that we spend just talking about our personal and professional bests of the week. Then we jump into a bunch of tasks, and are we on track or off track? And it's simple 1-word answer. Are you on track or off track? And if you're off track, what is the result? What are you going to do about it? Right. And we write a quick thing to delegate. We don't take care of the delegation right then. It's like, okay, book a meeting with Charles, book a meeting with Eduardo, talk about this or ask client about that, and so on. Then then that's how we do our stand-up, and that more or less is the end of our stand-up. And we also do nowadays a team spotlight, so it's kind of a whatever, one person every week is takes a turn and what they're working on, right? So it's just, again, that's more for a team building exercise, slightly different than the regular EOS stuff. And then we also have a separate management meeting once a week as well, and that's a lot smaller, and there we talk about bigger projects, but it's very, very similar structure. And I would say just the meetings alone are having that organization is a tremendous boost. And I think this goes a little bit to what Mark was saying, that you get sidetracked. We were able to do all kinds of deployments earlier, and we get slower and slower, but now we're getting faster and faster again. And that's because I was managing as the lead in the company. I was managing too much stuff. I was too many plates spinning. And it's really hard to sometimes to let go. Mark, do you find with developers, is it like you don't want to let go the architecture or the engineering aspect, or micromanage, or what would you say that's?
Yes, I have issues with that in all aspects of my life, and never more so than with the development.
So I think a lot of people do. I mean, I certainly do. As the technical side of me, I have a hard challenge with that. So, but one of the things is I can say from experience is if you cultivate your team so that you're really comfortable and you feel really comfortable with what they're doing a certain types of documentation, they're doing code in a certain way, or they're doing communication with clients in a certain way, then you can start to build that confidence and remove yourself a little bit. So that's a big thing. Does anybody use a consultant at all? And is there anybody else in the call? Actually, Dave Pong, you had in the chat that you said you had some tips. So you want to jump in?
Hey guys, sure. Mark and Jesse and even you, Charles, talked about a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of it actually I follow to a degree. Everything that I do really now set up to exit. So I'm not really married to anything. I don't I used to be in love with everything that I did. And now through all these years, it's like, okay, you build it. And if somebody's interested in buying it, you sell it and then move on to the next project. So that's sort of the mantra that I live by now, right, from that standpoint. And I think somebody asked about the expertise or bring on partners and stuff like that. Having partners is not a bad thing. So in a couple of the systems that I have set up now, they're all recurring revenue models. And I actually have partners. So the partners actually bring a bunch of the things that I don't have to do into the equation. So they may have, for example, the connections into the market, have the expertise in a certain market, and they can actually bring in the revenue for the software. Right? Okay. And that leaves me to focus on just the development work and stuff like that, and looking at how to build the platform so that it can scale and stuff like that. I think, Charles, you've seen a bunch of projects I've been jumping on and out of. And stuff like that, right? So these things come like really quickly, and if I see an opportunity and there's somebody there willing to spend a ton of time on it, then I'll say, okay, let's partner. Let's do it. You do your part, I do my part, and then basically we get the system up, right? And then the revenue stream starts, right? And then once it's going, you know that it's a viable product. And then if you want to build it into a big vertical, you can actually start scaling it. So that's just a little tip. So look for, some partners sometimes, right? It makes it a little bit easier because, just like you're taking control over too many things, or having a hard time letting go and things like that. So get somebody in to do, let's say, the other half of it, the marketing, the sales, the closing, things like that. All the outreach into the communities and stuff like that for the product or whatever the vertical and stuff like that. Right? Okay. So just to give you guys an idea, I'm currently working on 5 sort of SaaS model projects right now. And they're all in different markets. Okay. And I don't have any expertise in a couple of these, but my partners do. Right. So that's just a couple of quick little tidbits.
So basically the takeaway, if I understand correct, Dave, the takeaway is that your model, if you will, is to find somebody else who can be the front end person, who's the knowledge specialist.
Or has the way to get into that market.
Right. Right.
Just
so in
like
other words,
Mark,
they can make it viable then.
Yes. Yeah.
A viability partner, if you will. Yeah. And then you'll take care of the logistics of the software and the implementation and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think a lot of consultants can do that with their existing clients as well. Now, every client I've seen, a lot of clients that have a database that's within their, that operates their own in-house stuff, always thinks that database is the cat's butt. And they want to, they think it can make a product for everybody. But I often see that their product is too specialized. Which kind of takes us back to execution and what does it take to get an MVP? And I think this is a really, really important one. I was just consulting with somebody this week and they're building a vertical and they want to put every feature into the vertical. And I'm trying to be diplomatic, but saying you got to slow down. Let's get a customer first for you. And then you can start implementing, get something out the door, and then iterate it on there. There's a good book on that. I think it's called, Mark, you've read it, I think it's Eric, Lean Startup. It's Eric something or other.
I don't know that one.
No? Okay, yeah, and it's pretty good. It's Eric, the Lean Startup, Eric Meyer or something like that. I think his name is Eric. Anyhow, it's a pretty decent Eric Reese. There it is there. So if you're interested in that, this is a really, really good book. And basically he talks about MVPs and he takes the MVP. Also, Tim Ferriss talks about this a little bit in one of his books as well. 4-Hour Work Week or something like that. Same kind of concept, but Eric talks about it from a startup perspective. And the gist there is that you're going to build an app that's going to be a widget tracker, and you're going to have all these amazing things in it and all these it can handle all the different color widgets and everything. Instead of just doing that, start off and see if people even want a widget tracker, which is some of the stuff that we covered earlier in this call anyway. And his idea is like he build a page and purchase widget tracker and put a button on it. And the button just goes to a form. And if that person's willing to click the button and go through the form and pay, don't charge the card, but that would have been a paying customer. And if you can't get anybody to sign up that way, how are you going to get them to sign up with whether you have the software or not? Right. And I think that's the fundamental concept, is just really, really lean stuff and get it out the door and then iterate on there. I found that at certain times, we just had to stop saying, hey, I want to get this feature and all of these amazing things and all these cool ideas that I'm in love with into our product. And instead, let's just get something out the door. Right. In engineering, there's American engineering and Russian engineering. American engineering is get everything perfect, get like a space shuttle, get it all beautiful, the state of the art, everything's perfect. The Russian engineering is let's get it into space. If it crashes, we'll get another one up there with another cosmonaut. Right. And eventually we'll win. And the Russian style of engineering tends to be a little bit more effective. And that's where Agile more or less comes from. What about funding and paying for your app? Mark, you had mentioned about bootstrapping, and from what I understand, you more or less funded, everything was self-funded as you went.
Yeah, I'm old and I'm old school, and I kind of believe that and I know this is wildly outdated and unpopular, but unless you really have something special, some social media thing that's going to take the world by storm. If you have a product that you think you're going to sell to a buyer, where it's not some tricky thing that's paid for by advertising, it should you should be able to do that. You should be able to work with some people, get them paying. And yeah, it'll be tough. But I can't imagine there's many people doing things in FileMaker where there's just going to be this explosive growth and rounds of funding, like we see in the social network or something like that.
Right.
But again, that's just, my opinion.
We actually do have one client that has external venture cap, and they have a vertical, and their vertical is has a ton of potential, big potential, and their clients would be major sports organizations or arenas and things like that. So they have it's a lot of promise, and it's a fairly complex app as well. Jesse, how about yourself? Did you ever get any external funding, or what paid for you to spend the time on developing it?
So it was all bootstrap, really to start with, and what we were able to figure out in terms of getting more funding to pay for features and everything else is we figured out other ways to monetize areas of the application itself, in terms of getting the contractors who work for us to pay for an app experience, so that satisfied a legal requirement to keep them as independent contractors, but it also helps provide some funding to support other development. And then we had a couple of clients who basically stepped up and said, hey, we want to help pay for this big other half of the vertical, and they gave us some great development cash that we were able to use to stand up other pieces of the product that they weren't ownership stakes or anything else. They were basically purchasing access early to features. So we really kind of positioned some of that stuff early. With my school vertical, that's also been bootstrapped. And I'm at the point now where there are some opportunities with SBA loans that will actually help to fund some other things in terms of infrastructure and some other components. I think, to your point, Mark, about when somebody wants 20% of the company and they're really asking for 20% of everything that you own and have mortgaged, that's just not quite where it needs to be. So we're doing that, but we're doing it in such a way that makes sense, and we know that we can pay for, that we're not going to put ourselves out. So that's kind of where we are. Yeah.
We're in a really interesting time, where entrepreneurs and tech developers, there's a certain kind of social status to that now that I don't think there always was, and people seem to want to be able to claim that. And I'm always
be a founder.
Yeah. Every celebrity wants to, I'm an entrepreneur, and really all you're doing is endorsing this tequila. But I've known people, I had friends, and one of them, he had a good idea, but it was pretty obvious it was only ever going to be able to generate so much money. And he spent so much, all he talked about was fundraising. And I kind of thought, you're a talented guy. If you took the time you're spending on this fundraising and actually just started building the thing, I wonder if you might not be better off. But ultimately I decided he defined himself. He liked being able to say, I'm fundraising for my new, tech venture. And it's a trap that I think people do fall into.
So there's the status and the glamour.
Yeah. Plus you never really have to put anything out there. You're not really risking failure with something that you built.
That's interesting. So do you think that's the reason why most people build this stuff? I think with our group here, we all like hacking in FileMaker. So that's our tool that we're really good at. And it just made sense to start doing it and building it ourselves. There are certainly people in our community where the dev is an in-house dev and the company owns the vertical. We have some of those. And I think that aspect can come into play there as well. We were kind of lucky. We, with BetterForms, we didn't have any subscriptions because it wasn't a product until we presented it. Became a product when we debuted in Pause on Air in Berlin, .fmp in Berlin. And Prior to that, we did have people using the framework, but they were using one-offs, more or less cloning the base code. And we had no front-end editor, so you're literally pasting JSON into a FileMaker field, which was pretty brutal. And that allowed me to do consulting for 3 clients or 4 clients at the same time. And they're reasonably lucrative clients, at least from that perspective then. And then I could take that money and reinvest it into developing the framework. So I could develop the base code on my own while they paid me to use that base code and to implement it. And they also paid for some of those features. And I think if you can do something where the client, your future clients can give you money right now, that's kind of that seems to be a pretty good win for us. Later on, I mean, at that time we were 100% consulting. Now we're about 50% consulting and 50% subscription sales to run our team. So we do need that consulting, but we actually, up until last year, we never sought out the consulting, but now we're actually slightly more aggressively going after clients and things like that too. Just because we have the resources now that we can knock stuff out and do a pretty good job on it. We're getting a lot faster as we start to not stumble and figure things out. So I think I would love to be able to be at a point where we didn't rely on consulting, but at the same time, I don't think it'd be good for our particular business because we don't have a front end person who's that in. The front end person ends up being me, who's has the in on the industry, and I need to keep an active involvement, and that's where the consulting comes in because it really gives us an idea of what we need. Hindsights. What would you guys say looking back? What would you do different if you could start it all over again, Jesse? Everything.
Well, so the first thing, and this is actually a complaint I have against Claris FileMaker in general. There's so much damn power in this software that you can do damn near anything. And when you can do damn near anything, you end up potentially really screwing up your platform. And you start to get all these great ideas about, oh, I can have a calculation field do all these things. And then you wonder why your system runs really, really slow later on down the line. So if I could change anything starting over, I think the first thing I would do is probably I would have a much more clear idea about the limitations of what I was developing and how I was developing it. That's actually helped on my second project, which is great.
So what do you mean by that? What would that look like?
So because I've actually learned and developed over the years my own skill set, I know that I made mistakes with my first platform. I know Stiletto has issues, right? So when I built my second vertical, I knew what to avoid from that standpoint in terms of, gigantically wide tables, for example, right? Like thinking about building lean so that when you are building, you're thinking about performance at the end of the day, right? So it's about delivering a great experience all the way across, and that really comes from architecture. So I would definitely change that first in terms of my approach. And probably the second thing I would do is I would probably have implemented a better documentation feature internally, so I could keep track of what the hell I changed, when I changed it. I love it.
So documenting your code, not your internal work processes, but your code itself.
I've made the code myself, just to know, like, hey, on January 4th, I updated this particular feature, rolled it out to these 6 clients, and this is what happened. This is what changed, right? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to July or August, you might not necessarily remember what you did for client A, B, or C, and that makes a big difference to keep your customers happy. From a vertical standpoint, in terms of the actual hands-on thing. And I think, honestly, the other piece that I would do differently, and I think, Mark, to your point about pricing, we are really fortunate in the FileMaker space that we can stand things up quickly and we can charge kind of what we feel like we need to charge. when we run up against these web apps that are built on scale and they're, $9 a month, it's hard to charge somebody, $5,000 for access to a platform when that's really value priced, but then you still have to fight that question of the $9 a month that race to the bottom. So I would have a much clearer perspective on what we did for pricing, and pricing for value moving forward. And one last thing I would change, honestly, and this I've done a lot in the last 3 months, is to pay really close attention to internal cost and business unit cost, and knowing how much development time costs, how much it costs to stand up a feature, how much it costs to deploy a feature, that sort of thing. Like it's a little thing in the software world where we think, oh, we just throw up a feature, but then sometimes you don't think about what it's going to cost you in data in and data out. There's a lot of kind of hidden pieces of that. So I would have a much clearer framework for that the next time.
Totally agree with you there. We'll produce a feature, we'll release a feature in our editor, and it'll be a little feature. It'll be this scrolling thing here with these buttons that scroll. Let's talk about that feature. So you think, oh, how much is that feature going to cost? That's a nice thing. Let me just whip it in there. But this is probably about without exaggerating, I'm guessing it's about a $3,000 feature just to do this.
Sure.
All right. And it sounds insane, but there's UX that comes in. Then there's the implementation, then there's the backend code, and then there's back to the UX again, because it doesn't, and then there's product testing and all of these things. So all said and done, that could be around about a $2,500, I'd say, to about a $3,000 feature, all said and done, for the different people who are involved in it to work on. And, there's little things, there's a lot of little stuff going in here, and to fix all the bugs and everything. Pretty much every bug that comes in is at least, I would say it's even the smallest of bugs is about $25 to $50. And the biggest of bugs, which would be like something that would involve our base code, it'd probably between the $3,000 to $10,000 range to fix some of those things. And that sounds really insane, but that's the reality of actual costs when you look at all the people who are involved as you grow and so on. I mean, the app it generates it has a greater scope than some small little thing. But that's a real valuable tip, is to keep an eye on those kinds of costs. I think that comes down, for us anyway, it comes down to having that streamlined process. We use some third-party software, and I used to be such a tight ass with spending money on software. In fact, I hardly spent any money on any software virtually for my whole life, except for the past 5 years. And if you're from the old days, it's like, you buy a box of discs and then you go to the store and rent the software. And, but we use internal apps now. We use a lot of internal processing apps. And one of the ones we pay money for is things like this report a bug feature here. It's Marker.io. And then we can literally go in and we can say, hey, here, and we can assign it right away, right at this point, right to the right team person. And it goes into the pipeline. And a day or 2 days or 3 days later, it's done. And then it goes into, and it continues from there. And having those things really, really reduce the costs as well. Mark, how about yourself? What would you change if you could go back?
Well, yeah, definitely the pricing. I didn't. There was so much I didn't take into account on the expense side, and I kind of assumed 95% market penetration, which was of course ridiculous, and that sure would have made money with that number of users, and also just the fact that I went with this $100 a month thing, and I probably should have been 99, but even then, it's just doing that. It's a very hard thing to get past that. When you go past that, people notice that. So I should have probably started something, even if I wanted to keep it low, it should have been like 119 or something, just so that bump after a couple of years to 129 would have been a little bit less visible. I should not have started so low, and I knew that. Like they say, it's always easier to go down than to go up. You can always have a sale, but people tend to resent increases. So I wish I had paid a lot more attention to that, put more thought
I
into
think
it.
that was one of the best tips that you gave me.
I learned the hard way, man.
Yeah, that was one of the best tips. And what we did is our product wasn't polished enough, but we needed to get some revenue in. So we offered it at a discount, right? And our first people were $500 a year. Now our current pricing is a little over, well, it's 3.5 times that now per year for the same plan. And we said this is the target price of where we're going to be, but we needed to get some revenue in the door and get some people actually using things and building things. And so we can feel the pain and we can make the changes and all of that stuff. So that was thank you for that, because that was a super, super valuable tidbit there.
I'm glad it worked out.
You know what? Can I throw one more thing in there? And I think this is my advice to everybody who's on this, we're all in many cases solopreneurs. We all kind of have our own business, whatever. The love of God, please value your time more than you do now. I've had to push my clients to understand that there's times for when things are a 4-alarm fire, and there's times when things are not. And your time as a developer is insanely valuable. And this may sound like a little thing, but my wife and I actually did the math, and it made sense for us to stop driving our kids to school and have someone actually do that for us, because the math on what it actually costs us to be out of the office for that 2.5 hours a day. Right. So figure out what that is. Big picture. If you're gonna do your own vertical and do your own development company, is understand what your actual value is to your own product and your own self. And when you figure that number out, you'll have a lot more. It'll make it easier to sleep. Let's put it that way.
Excellent. I think the biggest thing that I would have changed is I would have got UX right from the start. We don't have a lot of technical debt in terms of code, but in terms of UX, we have a phenomenal amount of debt. And we're just at the point now that we're starting to overcome it. And you think, how can you have UX debt? Well, your UX is powered by your backend, so it's powered by your code. The code's nothing wrong with the code, but it's powering the wrong things, the wrong user workflows. And if we could have had some different type of UX and understand our clientele slightly better. I mean, I've been on calls pretty much with everybody here for at least hours with every one of you guys over the years. So I have a pretty good idea of the clients, but I still think like me, I'm still blind. And when it's not until you start to onboard somebody who knows nothing about anything, about very little about FileMaker. I was doing a demo the other day, and they're still learning about JSON and even naming fields. They had these literally full sentences in the name of the fields. And when you start seeing perspectives from those clientele, and that's what a UX person would have saw way earlier than I did. Because I'm thinking like, well, I need the framework to do this crazy advanced thing, and it's got to run this, and it's got to do multi-threading and have messaging, and I'm so blind to that stuff that we wouldn't have put any effort into that, and instead we would have put all the effort right from day one into the UX, and then iterated upon that. So I'm involved with a vertical with Jordan Jacobs, who was on here. I don't think he's on anymore. I might be still, and that project started with UX right from the beginning. And that's really, really neat to see, because then the whole workflows and things like that are thought out. So that'd be my personal one, is to, to invest in more UX right from the start, so that I'm not building the wrong thing. And it's not just about the prettiness, it's about what the product does, what the features are, what problem or pain that it solves. Just looking forward now for your apps, strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What do you worry about, Mark, in the future, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. So, the big one for us is we take care of a niche market. It's flora. So it's retail, but it's different enough that all the, you know, the real race to the bottom stuff like Square POS, and I think Stripe is another one, you know, all these sort of tablet solutions you can get for free if you put your credit card processing through that company, they really aren't quite good enough for our clients. But of course, as those companies, you know, as they start to reach market saturation, and or QuickBooks POS is another one, as they start to get more aggressive about vacuuming up these little niches. Shopify is another one. You know, there's a lot of florists who have Shopify websites, and it's not really good enough for floral. There are weird things about floral, but it's getting better all the time, and they have POS too. So it's just, you know, these big, super cheap guys that they will
So
keep
as those
phoning
the big mega companies, the big upstarts, they can expand their product in time. So your threat is that they will expand enough to provide that killer feature that you have that's unique to your platform, and therefore it's harder to make the sale to them.
Yeah, exactly. Either they do it, or, you know, like with Shopify, they have like a marketplace, like an app add-on marketplace. So people doing it there, and, you know, it's hard to compete against a standard, right? And things like Shopify are quickly becoming that for retail.
Wow, that's interesting. I've never thought about those companies as being a threat to you. I would have thought just on the first level, which would be other point of sale flower shop apps, CRMs.
Yeah, there are lots of those. You know, generally we can compete against those just by having a better product, doing a better job on service. You know, not outsourcing support, so you're waiting 12 hours, dealing with language issues. But yeah, to me, it's Shopify, they're a competitor, but wow, I mean, what a great platform, and anybody who's worked with their APIs and stuff, it's just phenomenal.
I think Filemaker, for the most part, is seeing that now, because they're seeing other low-code drag and drop type apps emerging, and they're feeling, obviously, if you're going to be feeling that pressure, for the same reason that now these other things are becoming so powerful that they can do more stuff, and we have slightly less demand, or less and less demand for that niche that FileMaker fills. Yeah. And I guess that's interesting. Jesse, would that same thing apply to you? Probably not so much, because you're more specialty in especially your second app. Are there any strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, threats?
So it's funny that I worry about two things on my second app. And the biggest threat is that there are some gigantic gorillas in the education technology space with billions of dollars in capital, in assets, who I think if they wanted to could develop something like I've done quickly and drop it in the market, and that would cause me a problem. So I'm in this weird space of I've got to get as sticky as I can, as quick as I can, and make it easier for them to buy my solution, as opposed to try and develop something else, right? To develop a competitor. So for me, the opportunity is the market's gigantic. If I can get in there and get sticky, great. And the big threat is the same as the opportunity, which is kind of scary. So what's funny though, and I give you a ton of credit for this, Delphs, is that you actually kind of encouraged the idea for the second vertical, because
we were talking about that. Yes,
I remember we had this vertical going as a standalone, and then just from your conversations, like, this is crazy, this should be BetterForms, and now it is, and now it's.
Yeah, we also said that the one key feature is like, this is the killer feature.
Yeah, and now we're killing it, right? So
with the analytics, yeah.
So anyway, so it really the big threat is about, you know, I think, Mark, I get your point with having the POS solutions, and, you know, big picture in many industries, the companies that really want to make money, they get themselves in between the transaction, right? They get in between the customer and the business, and that's where they make their sliver of a percentage of every sale. So that's where those particular companies are killing it. And that's where we have to be careful, because it's easy for them to drop a free solution so that they can get 9 cents.
Weasel in there. Yeah.
So the value we provide has to continue to be enough to make those other companies want to get in between our transactions, which is it's a kind of a crazy threat.
Just to make sure that I understand. So for Mark's case, it would be if a company like Stripe came out with a drag and drop point of sale customer relationship management app. And of course, it uses Stripe in the back end for all the transactions. Or I guess it's not just Stripe, it would be any of these shopping cart things. So that's really interesting. So it's another company that can possibly get in with an ancillary service, but they're so big that they can just wipe you out with your front end service that you normally are making that's your uniqueness.
Yep, absolutely.
I've never thought about that. That's really, really interesting.
Charles, I have a friend, and it's interesting. So he does, merchant services, the credit card clearing, and then he partnered up with these guys, and they were making software for pet boarding facilities. If you want to go on holidays, they take care of your dog for a week. And there probably wasn't a lot of software for those guys anyway. And they went in there with Straight. The software was free. You didn't pay a penny for it, but they took a piece of every credit card sale. And I'm always kind of shocked when businesses are so unsophisticated as to fall for that, because clearly nothing is free. It's invisible to you. You make $100 sale, you get $95 in the bank at the end of the day instead of 97. But they did fantastically well and ended up selling it. I mean, it stuff like that always surprises me.
It's really interesting.
Can I just have a quick question?
Yeah.
Both Mark and Jesse, when you're using Stripe or Shopify or whatever, either of those platforms or any of those payment platforms also do credit card fraud detection? I came across a new company that's doing real-time, I don't know what they call it, like fraud detection called Forter, F-O-R-T-E-R. So I'm just wondering if any of you guys have come across that.
I haven't seen it in my travels. The companies that I kind of see out there are so big that they're processing a metric ton of actions every day. So I'm sure they've got processes in place for the fraud detection, but I haven't seen that in particular.
My experience is the same as Jesse. I always kind of assume that, Global Payments or whoever it is, First Data, that they're doing that fraud detection. So, Stuart, how does that work? How does that?
If you look them up, Forter, F-O-R-T-E-R, they explain. I guess they must partner with companies like Shopify or Stripe or any of the payment processors, and they're doing real-time fraud detection through algorithms. They're a company out of Israel. They've set up a head office now in New York because they're pre-IPO. So I came across them because somebody who I used to work with just took a job with them. That's why I came across them, and I thought, okay, there must be other companies in that space. I don't know if Shopify and Stripe would have rolled their own or would have relied on back end, Visa and MasterCard to do that.
Stripe does have a service. It's called 360 or something, Stripe something full circle or something like that. And it's accessible from their dashboard. You have to configure it, and it can do some type of fraud detection. I don't know how in depth it is, but is that an issue?
I don't know if it's an issue for me. I was asking if it's an issue for Jesse or Mark or your customers.
No, we don't. We don't.
No.
It must be more along the lines of, like an Amazon and any large marketplace.
When you can rip off. If you're selling a software, it's pretty hard to rip the software off. If you're selling a product, it's a different story, right? So
yeah,
like if we had a developer that would, is ripping us off in some fashion or breaching something, that's pretty easy to mitigate and control.
No, I was just wondering if your software that you're building or selling is implementing any of this fraud detection.
I don't think you need to. I think just use that's something I would never work on. Instead, I would just rely on a company like Stripe, and if that becomes an issue, I'd take it up with them. It's not really a factor that should affect your company. The only time it would is when a fraudulent transaction would not be covered by the credit card company or the credit card issuer. And then therefore you're eating things up. And I don't really know of a scenario that would happen.
And I'll say this, Stuart, we did have a couple of people who purchased access to the application, who tried to report it as fraudulent through Stripe, and we were able to show not only screenshots but data in and data out to prove, hey, not only did they do this, they actually signed for it, they used it. I can show them accessing it in the background, like, so. From
what was their logic? What were they trying to do there, Jesse? Were they just not happy and they wanted a refund kind of thing, or what was that?
No, it was basically a contractor out in the field who decided that they didn't want to do the work as assigned, and then they realized they got charged $5 for the app, and then they were salty about being out $5, so they wrote it off as fraud.
Wow, so you had to jump through those hoops for $5.
Yep, and you get pinged with a.
So at least it doesn't leave a stain on your account.
Yeah. So
right. Interesting.
Did you win that one, Jesse?
Oh, 100% chance.
You did.
I went completely medieval on my documentation process for that, and was able to show basically when they logged into the system, how many times they used the system. I had all the JSON packets. I had it all, and the guys at Stripe were like, thank you, this will be super easy, we'll be back in touch. And they released it right away.
That's great. It's funny because early on, and I'm talking back, 10, 12 years ago, it was almost impossible. I can remember dealing, people would report, oh, it's, like false dispute. And the question was basically, can you prove physical delivery? And of course, the answer with software is, I can't prove physical delivery, but like you, I can show you logs, I can show you reports, I can show you all this stuff, prove beyond a doubt that they're using this. And they're like, oh, great, that's fantastic. Can you prove physical delivery? And if you couldn't, you were done.
Yeah.
We have some SWAT stuff too. I think our strength is that we're a flexible front end platform, but our weakness is that there's a steeper learning curve, which we are trying to work on. And that's one of the things that we would have done differently is really reduce that. Our opportunities, I'll talk about in a second, and our threats are FileMaker. Not FileMaker in terms of licensing. I think we'll always be compliant that way. But a lot of people do ask us about that. Well, how does FileMaker feel like that? And I don't think I know of anybody who has built a BetterForms app where it's taken away FileMaker licenses. Maybe out of several hundred clients, that might have happened once or twice that they've reduced, but it's not meant to replace that, as you guys know. Our opportunities, our threats are FileMaker will eventually design something, or they'll catch up, or something they're going to have to catch up to more industry compatible front ends and things like that, more state-of-the-art stuff. I'd like to think that we have a tremendous opportunity to stay ahead of that because we can iterate faster and we're using different tech as well. But that I can't guarantee that. So our opportunities are other areas as well. We have our BetterForms was designed from the ground up to, even though our whole industry is FileMaker, it's underneath the hood does not need to necessarily be FileMaker powering it. So we could use other databases as a backend, or other services, like, for example, Microsoft Dynamics, QuickBooks, NetSuite, Oracle, and Salesforce. And we could provide web applications that sit in front of those devices. One of the reasons why we went with FileMaker is because one of the things we talked about earlier is having that knowledge worker, that front end person who has a foot in the industry. We already had that, so that made sense to go in that line. Now I don't want to cause any alarms, so we're not like dropping FileMaker or anything like that, but that's our 2-year plan right now. So we already have people working on that. They did dedicated time per week doing research into these other areas to see if we can have some viability there. And that will, of course, diversify us a bit more, allow us to add a lot more into the framework. The framework will be still compatible. So all of those 10x markets compared to the FileMaker market, all of that good stuff will bleed backwards. It's very, very similar to John Sindelar with Seed Code and Dayback Calendar. They went into these other markets, and that's when their product really, really took off in terms of quality. So that covers that for us. What about the future and pivots? Is there any room for pivoting in any way, Mark, that you can see? Like, you can take, hey, we got this great thing, but let's just take this one little app. Like, I'll use Slack a lot of times is a good example. They were building another app and they built Slack as an internal messaging app. And then that became the product. Is there anywhere that you could see potential product pivots for you?
It's funny where I see friends and competitors get into trouble is they start thinking, oh man, the grass really starts looking green over there. I had one competitor and I heard kind of through secondary channels that, the flower business sucked. He was going to go into general retail POS. And when I heard that, I thought, fantastic, please, throw all your energy into that. And now I heard that same guy. And this guy doesn't even have 1% penetration into the market he's been trying to serve for almost 15 years, that now he's going to conquer floral wholesale. And again, I go to bed and sleep well that night because I know that's crazy. So yeah, I guess I'm always looking for some opportunity for something like that. But for the most part, I pride myself on, kind of staying in the gutter fight that I know and not getting tempted, with some other industry that surely it's, there's tons of money to be made over there. Cause I'm sure the people who've been doing that for 10, 15 years could tell me horror stories about it's the toughest place in the world to make money.
Jesse, your second product, that sounds like it was a bit of a pivot from something else. Was that correct?
Complete pivot. I mean, I do consulting work for private schools all over the US and all over the world. And I built this thing to help do some prospecting and help schools vet and find more full pay families for their private schools. And this product basically came as an idea that I just built in FileMaker. And then I realized, oh, if I can connect all these different APIs, I've got a product. I did it. And then the real pivot was to go web-based. I've considered, do I pivot it and make it like an Electron thing that's like a Slack deliverable? And the more I think about it, like, why would I even do that? It works great in BetterForms. It works great on the web. And it, to me, this was the big pivot. If there are any other pivots that I would include or that I would think about for this particular vertical, I'm not going to be able to get in the way of the transactions, which I would love to be able to do. But if I could get in the way of school communication, that's another way to make a real dent. But my second app is really the great pivot, and thank God for COVID because I had time to actually work on it.
Hey,
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry if I could, Jesse. It's interesting because 10, 12 years ago, a friend of mine who teaches at a private school came to me and said, you should do something for private schools because there's no good software there. And it was one of those times I kind of said, you know what, I'm sure there is. And I know you're taking care of that now. But I'm curious, one of the first things Charles and I worked on was integrating our thing with a data enrichment service. Do you do anything like that? So the school, they can throw a prospective student's parents' email at this endpoint and come back with, education, household income, that kind of thing?
So part of our application will provide that information on a prospective family because I used to be an admission director. So I used to do all that research. So now I can tell you before the family comes to campus what car they drive, what they owe on it, how much cash they have in the bank. I can tell you the education, how many kids in the household, how many people live in the household.
Wow.
What their buying proclivities are, what they spend on credit cards. Do they travel? Where do they travel? So you've got a very clear picture of a family before they even step foot on campus, so that you can, understand what direction you want conversations to go. And that also helps school figure out their financial aid budgets. That information also is used on your prospective or your current student body, so that we can build lookalike audiences to then prospect families that look exactly like the people that you want to have influence.
So you've created a database for prospecting private school affluent families, and you can generate lookalike audiences in a similar fashion to most social ad networks.
Correct.
To do that, I love that.
And
that is so. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's great.
And
Mark, it's funny that you mentioned somebody said you should build a private school database. One of the earliest things I worked on back in the early 2000s was I worked at a private school, and it was all built in FileMaker, and it actually wasn't too bad. And it was, it did report cards, it did attendance, it did everything internally. They had a computer in every classroom for the teacher to log in, log attendance every morning. It tracked all the it tracked all the bookkeeping, not bookkeeping, but all the monthly checks that the parents had provided, prepaid, pre-written checks. For deposited, created the deposit forms. They did fundraising. It had a fundraising module. It did everything. There was a Lasso backend website that was accessed by the teachers off-site to do all the report cards, and for the teachers to do attendance in classroom. So it was all encompassing, and the company who built it for them then wanted me to redevelop it that they could sell it to other private schools, like private high schools and things. And so, we created a more generic version, and they went out and tried to sell it, and they had no interest at all. This was just in the Toronto region. No interest from the other schools that they were already providing tech services to all these other private high schools, and no schools were interested in buying it or doing anything. And that was the end of that product. So, and since then, that private school, I kept, even after I left, I kept providing support once or twice a year to run tax credit forms, because they got some tax credits because they were a religious school. And then after about 3-4 years, they decided to go with some other product. I don't know what they went with. It doesn't really matter. They got rid of the whole FileMaker backend. But it's interesting. The private school area is very difficult to crack. So I think, Jesse, you're great. You've gone down a very specific niche. Instead of trying to give them the whole product, you're just giving them, one area, which I think is excellent, and not an area that any ed tech company would want to come in and provide the whole apple, and you're just providing one slice.
And I appreciate that, because everyone asks me, well, are you going to build a CRM?
Yeah.
And I said, you're off your rocker if you think I'm going to build a CRM.
I have one ready for you if you want it. I mean, it's been a dead product for 15 years, so I can easily update it.
That's great. But to the point, like, that's the hardest thing to get into any school, is ripping out all of that student information data. So why be a replacement when you can be a bolt-on, and that's where you can provide value and add value to the product.
Yeah,
so.
That's really
absolutely.
Bolt-on is the key option. Instead of trying to replace something, if you can augment an existing environment, it's a lot easier to get in the door.
Yep.
Because the entrance barrier is easier.
Sorry, Charles. Jesse, do your clients, do they appreciate that data enrichment?
You have no idea, because
really?
these folks, in many cases, are flying blind. They have no idea kind of who their customers really are. And to be able to provide them a lot more insight so that they're not leaving financial aid dollars on the table is a big deal. So,
oh, wow.
So when you think about net tuition revenue, if the tuition at school is $15K and they offer a family 10 when they should have offered them 12 or 13, that's a big potential loss. So the analytics of what we're doing is trying to get them to understand that, for a private high school that's $15K a year, it's not a $15,000 contract, it's a $60,000 contract. And data that we're providing is going to help them realize more of that $60K than they would if they didn't really understand what was going on with that family in the first place.
That's amazing. So is that feature, access to that data, is that all you can eat, or is it a usage kind of billing situation? How does it work?
It's essentially all you can eat from that standpoint. We do have a couple of different switches that you can turn on to generate more prospecting lists that cost additional, because those are hard costs on my standpoint from hitting APIs, et cetera. But otherwise, it's pretty much baked into the cost.
It's interesting. I only mention it because you said you're looking for a way to potentially get in between. Do you think with new clients there might be a potential there where you could bill them per profile kind of thing?
Well, actually, here's how I figured out how to get in between. I'm getting in between by now offering advertising. So by using geofence, so I geofence every prospect, and so we can geofence those prospects and then use services like Ground Truth or El Toro to serve ads specifically to that family without them even knowing that they're being advertised to.
Oh, wow.
Right? Isn't that great?
So we're able to access the data for all the devices in a house and know that they are completely set up inside of a geofence. So we can target existing families, we can target prospective families, and we can also target customers of existing businesses. So for example, you might geofence the local golf course that's a private course, and anybody who goes there, you can serve ads for your school. So there's some really cool stuff that we can do that we've kind of tied in on top of it that allows you to do some really high-end and really aggressive marketing for many schools. And most of these schools are living in the dark ages. So their idea of advertising is putting out yard signs or buying a billboard on I-95. And while that's fine, that's not really putting the right eyes on the message when you need to. So by being specific with your marketing budget, we can actually come under what people are spending for an advertisement in a magazine, and we can get them 200,000 impressions on the exact people they need that can afford it, that have kids, that are just like the families that are already in their school, and get a conversation started.
What a brilliant way of marrying your analytics side with a sideline product.
Yep.
So
for you, Jesse, that's amazing.
Yeah, isn't that great? Don't you love that? So if I understand correctly, you go through and I say, okay, I want everybody between $60,000 and $90,000 in some metric and that are more or less in this area, the travel isochrone travel distance, and then I could say market these people, something like that, or target these people, and I could market to them.
There's a couple ways to do it. The one is I get a list of families that are a match for that particular school. Mm-hmm. And I generate that list, and I have all the data in terms of their housing and what they make and all that sort of stuff. And I take their housing information, geocode it, create a geofence around that particular house, and then I serve ads into that geofence.
So you're targeting the house, like literally their IP address.
Correct.
Oh boy. Wow. So you have so if you could see it on a map, there'd be all these little, we're literally targeting these exact families.
That's correct.
Well, what if they have a dynamic IP and their IPA changes every week or so because, for whatever reason?
It's not, you're not targeting an IP address, you're targeting a geolocation. So anytime a cell phone breaks that geofence, it transmits a specific UUID to the network, and then you can say, oh, if a certain UUID breaks these certain parameters, we can serve ads for the school directly to that device.
Right, but that's assuming that, that's if the phone is on like a mobile network. What if it's on just Wi-Fi at home?
It still reports the location. Most apps do.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
There's lots of ways of figuring out where you are, regardless of whether you accepted the, would like to.
And these ad blockers and things don't work.
So again,
ad blocker is different, right? That's an ad. That's
intrusive. The ads are essentially served into any application on your device that is part of the the typical ad network.
Wow.
So you bid out the price of the advertisement. You know how much you want to spend on the impressions and the cost per impression, and then you create 4 to 5 different sizes of content, and those contents are delivered to that device because of the specifications that you require.
Mm-hmm. So it'd be the equivalent of us saying, oh, there's a DevCon or there's a pause on air, and I'm going to draw a geofence around all the 100 or 1,500 developers in that area, and now I can target them heavily.
Well, for instance, I've done that where I've geo-targeted the airport at a conference. So when all the developers land at the conference, they're going to start getting ads for whatever we're doing.
Right.
Charles,
Mark,
think about that, buddy.
Mark, I know. I can already hear your wheels spinning. Right. So I love this. That's interesting. Too bad Jeff's on this call, because he could really benefit from this as well. Wow, that's awesome. Awesome information there. And anybody who's looking at doing some really highly targeted marketing.
And happy to talk. I mean, ping me on Slack. I'm happy to talk anytime about kind of what we're doing and how we do it. So it's not rocket science, and it's not necessarily a secret sauce, but it's out there and you can do it yourself.
Awesome. We're going to finish up. We'll just open it up to anybody if anybody has any questions or anything for anybody today. And in the meantime, if you have some questions, try to launch first. Actually, there's a few people on chat. I'm just going to let me just have a quick look at those. So this is a link posted by Benedict Miller. Oh, this is okay for Lean Startup. This is a great book here. This is a link. He posted that in chat. I'm an audiobook person, so I can multitask and only get half the quality of the book in. Nick asked if anybody else is trying to launch their first vertical. How do we find help? Basically, I would say, Nick, one of the biggest things is to hang out with in the BetterForms community, because there's a significantly higher percentage of people who have verticals here than there are in the FileMaker Wild community. Maybe about 10 times as many people here. So this is a really good start. And I'm just going to mention some of the people here on the list that I know have verticals. I hope you don't mind me mentioning that. I don't think it's too confidential. But David Pong, Jesse Roberts, Neil Manchester, Mark Anderson. I might be missing some people here as well. Nick Kurz. And I think I might have missed. I think that's it. So of those people there, so that's a third of the people here, or there's a few people. There was a few more earlier on. A little bit less than a third have verticals. So by all means, if you have questions and stuff, bring them to our Friday lives. We don't have to stick on script by any means, and fire that stuff away. And if you want some feedback and things like that. We're happy to, I think Jesse and Mark and things like that are happy to field some questions regarding, viability of ideas. We're going to finish up now, guys, just because we're a little bit over time. And although we don't have a strict time budget, I have some commitments as well. If you're interested in consulting, we do things from high level to pure UX down to turnkey level consulting. It's a bit of a plug, but we have a number of other people too, so I'm not just going to plug us. We have some really good consulting companies, and some of them are on the line here. I've seen some really neat things. I see Chris Conger here with NaviQ, and they've built some incredible apps. We sometimes use them for demos. I see Beth, I think it was Beth, you just showed me an app the other day. And that was some pretty cool stuff that people have built. And so if you're ever looking for consulting companies aside from us, because it's a win-win for us regardless, just post something in our random channel, and some people can help you out. One thing that we can offer is we can offer some really good best practices and optimizations and things like that in your app too. So whenever you're ready for that, for the people who are not BetterForms developers, and I think everybody here is, so I don't need to say too much outside of this, but you're welcome to book demos and things like that with us as well. I just want to take a second and really thank our thank everybody today who chimed in, but really thank Mark and Jesse. Mark has been a bit of a software as a service mentor for me, because he's just got such a wealth of knowledge of all these little aspects like pricing companies and industry people and things like that. He introduced me to some people in the industry, Dan Martell and Patrick Campbell, who's like the pricing guru. He's the guy that companies like Dropbox call to say, hey, how do we do our pricing? All right, because that's an entire industry in its own for SaaS. And Jesse, the first time I met him in person was at DevCon, and we were grabbing a drink at the bar. I think you were grabbing dinner. And he was so passionate about the positioning of the app and some ideas, and that really left a big impression. So that's why I wanted to get you jumping in on this call as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Glad to keep the conversation going.
Awesome. I think that was really good, guys. I really enjoyed everything.
Charles, thanks for the opportunity. And just, I got to mention this. we've been working on something for a while, a new feature for our software that is 100% reliant on BetterForms. And I think we got it over the goal line this week, and it's just incredible. And I couldn't be happier with the work you and your guys did.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions, guys, before we finish up?
Thanks again, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.